Hey guys, so today I thought I would combine two lessons 2.05 and 2.06 into one because they're kind of quick and they're not too difficult. So I think they kind of go together. So I think combining them into one will work well. So first we'll talk about ions. And if you remember from maybe middle school science, an ion is any atom with a positive or negative charge, and they're present all over the body, and they have really important functions. Without ions, we wouldn't function like we do today. We wouldn't be alive without ions. So an example of an ion would be like Na plus or Cl minus. Any atom that has a charge we consider an ion, and it doesn't have to just be an atom. Some are compounds like C or HCO3. That should be 2 minus 2 minus or negative 2. That's also an ion. That's a molecule, but it's also an ion. Now most ions, or the atom ions like Na and Cl, would be inorganic compounds. So these would be inorganic. Oops. And remember, organic compounds is a compound that has carbon bonded to something else. So we would call this an organic compound over here still. These would be inorganic, though, because it does not have a carbon atom bonded to something else. So those are inorganic. Now when we take in, I use the examples of Na and Cl, those two ions. A lot of times we don't necessarily ingest or eat ions separately. We do sometimes, but like NaCl, normally we eat that together, and that's just table salt, right? So when you eat table salt, when you eat NaCl, your body breaks that down, and then it will become Na plus and Cl minus in your body, so it can use it for the purposes that it needs to use it for. So now we'll just go over some examples of important ions in your body and what they're used for. So next one, calcium 2 plus. That's a really important role in your body. Obviously, I think we all know it helps make our bones strong and our teeth strong, but it also has vital functions in heartbeat and muscle function. So it helps you. Without this, your muscles couldn't contract, and your heart's a muscle, so it needs calcium to contract. So let's see, we can do bones, teeth, muscles. My pen's working really well now. I'm happy about this new software. It's perfect. Okay, next example we'll go over is what I wrote up there already. HCO3 2 minus, and that's called carbonate. It comes from CO2, so our body produces CO2, our cells produce carbon dioxide as a waste product, and then that CO2 gets converted into this HCO3 minus 2 in our blood, and that acts as a buffer. And that word might not mean anything to you now. It will when you take chemistry, or hopefully it will when you take chemistry. But basically that just means it keeps the acid level in our blood constant. So it doesn't let our blood get too acidic, and it doesn't let our blood get too basic. It keeps the pH of our blood constant. It keeps how acidic our blood is constant. So we don't want our blood being too acidic, and we don't want it being too basic. We want to keep it in a small range, and this ion helps do that. Then we have sodium, Na plus. It's important in fluid balance within our cells. So fluid balance within our cells. And we don't want our cells to lose too much fluid, then they shrivel up and die. We don't want them to have too much fluid in them, then they will burst. We have potassium, and potassium helps to regulate the heartbeat. It also helps in regulating heartbeat, helps things moving in and out of cells, and it helps regulate your blood pressure. So we'll say heartbeat, blood pressure, and movement in and out of cells. We have a it's called the chloride ion. It's negative. Chloride is a negative ion. It's one of the, if you notice, a lot of these are positive. This one, HCO3 is negative, but we have calcium's positive, sodium's positive, potassium's positive. Chloride's negative. And this has many, that does many of the same functions that a lot of these other ones do, similar functions. It does a lot of them. It helps with heartbeat, it helps with blood pressure, and it's also really important to plants. We'll just write that down. Your lesson mentions specifically that it's important to plants, so we'll put that down. And then the last one we'll talk about, the last one that's mentioned in your lesson is the hydrogen ion, H+. And this has a real important role. This one helps create ATP. Without the hydrogen ion, we would not be able to create ATP, and as we should know now, ATP is like the energy currency for the body. ATP is the type of energy that our body uses. All of our cells, all the chemical reactions, everything that goes on in our body uses ATP, or most of it uses ATP as its energy source. So if we can't make ATP, we're gonna die. Okay, so I think that's it for 2.05. Let me open another screen here for 2.06. Let me get my pen out here. 2.06. Here we are. Okay, so 2.06 is about chemicals from living things. This is just kind of an interesting lesson. It's basically about all the chemicals that we get from the natural world and how we use them to help us as humans and make our life more comfortable. So for thousands of years, human people have been using nature, specifically plants, to cure ailments. One of the first ones, I know the example they give is Native Americans would chew on, I think, the leaves of the bark of the willow tree to reduce fever, because the willow tree is where aspirin comes from. And one of the effects of aspirin is not only a pain reliever, it's also a fever reducer. And so Native Americans, when they got sick, got a fever, they'd chew on the willow tree or bark, and then hopefully, and then the fever would go down a little bit. And so that's where it originated. Now, aspirin is the chemical in aspirin that does that is salicylic acid, and that's made in labs now. We don't grow a bunch of willow trees for that anymore, but that's where it started. We get a lot of cancer drugs. Cancer drugs come from a lot of natural sources, right? The malaria drug, it's spelled Quinine, I believe. And this is to treat malaria. Treating malaria, and that comes from a specific tree. We get that to treat malaria. Malaria, if you don't know, is a disease. It's not present in the United States so much anymore. It's more in tropical and warm areas. So Africa, it's a big problem in Africa, and some other tropical areas have a lot of malaria. And it's from mosquito bites. Mosquitoes carry it, and it's transmitted by mosquitoes. The big one we all probably know about is penicillin. And penicillin, it's the first antibiotic, and it was funny how that was found. So Fleming, the scientist's name was Fleming, was doing experiments on bacteria. He was growing bacteria in some plates. It got contaminated by some fungus from a different lab, and he noticed that the fungus killed the bacteria. It didn't let the bacteria grow anywhere near it. And so he did more experiments, found out that, we can use this to treat illnesses in humans, and from there we got antibiotics. Next thing we get from Natural World, we get a couple more. It mentions some things to reduce blood pressure. I'm not going to write all these down. These are slides in your lesson. We get aloe vera. If you've ever had a sunburn, a lot of people put aloe vera on it. it's got a cooling sensation. It makes it feel better. There's stuff to improve circulation. One that says it can improve circulation, but it can be fatal if you get too high of a dose. So that's a good point to remember, that there are all these natural cures, but you have to be careful because they're not always helpful. They can also be harmful. Ephedra, the ephedra plant is where ephedrine, if you remember that, it used to be something to help people lose weight until they found out if you took too much of it, then you can have heart attacks. So you actually cannot buy that in stores anymore. It's still used as prescription to treat some ailments, but not in stores anymore. And I think that was the last example that they gave in the lesson. So one thing, the point of this whole lesson was to show you that there's lots of things, lots of benefits we get from the natural world that we use to help make our life better and our life more comfortable. And if we lose that, for example, through deforestation of the rainforest, if we lose that, then we're going to miss out on a bunch of these possible drugs to help us. And so that's another reason why deforestation is such a big issue, is because if we're chopping down these rainforests and there's all kinds of species of plants and animals that we haven't even discovered yet. So we don't know what kind of helpful compounds they have in them. And if we chop down the rainforest and they're extinct before we even know about them, we're going to miss out on a lot of these drugs. Cancer drugs especially is a big thing now. There's a lot of research that goes on for cancer drugs in the rainforest, finding new species and seeing if they have compounds in them that can help treat cancer. And so that was kind of how the lesson ended there, talking about why it's important, why deforestation is such a big issue, and why losing species is such a big issue.